Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all well, and thank you for joining week 2 of the SADC TFCA webinar series, session number 3. We're very happy to have you here. My name is Lisa Blenken. I'm the admin of, and possibly also chair of the today's session. I'm the SADC TFCA network advisor on behalf of the SADC GIZ Transboundary Use Protection of Natural Resources program. Before we go into today's session, I would just like to highlight the rules of engagement, which you see in the presentation in front of you. First of all, it would be really nice to get to know you. So please type out your name, institution, and country in the chat box so that we know who is participating in today's webinar session. And then also for any questions you have during presentations, please just write them down in the chat box so that we keep a monitor on it. I will then possibly call you out on you to read out your question to a presenter. During the discussion time, you can also raise your hand and we'll make note of your question, which you then can ask. Today's session is about a unique regional program for TFCAs, the SADC experience. And we have a number of presenters for 3 presentations. First presentation will be on the SADC guideline for establishment and development of TFCAs by Kevin Zankel. Second presentation on the SADC TFCA monitoring evaluation framework by Dr. Clara Boccaccino. And the last presentation will be on the From Knowledge to Action for Protected Area Planet by the Palma Regional Resource Hub and the SADC TFCA portal. We will have 2 presenters for that, and then also a third presenter for like the concluding remarks. It's Beryl Nyamarao, sorry for the pronunciation, of the ICN by Palma program, Gugi Kimani of the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development, and Stephen Pedel of the ICN. But if I can maybe first ask Kevin to give us a presentation on the guidelines of the SADC TFCA establishment guidelines. Kevin has over 35 years of experience in the field of conservation and environmental management, and he is the current chair of the World Commission of Protected Areas Transboundary Conservation and Specialist Group. He's a consultant, but he was also coordinator of the Maloti-Drakensberg Transfrontier program for 5 years, and is currently consulting as a senior ecologist and a sustainability consultant. I'll stop sharing my screen, Kevin, so that you can start sharing yours.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Great, thanks Lisa for that introduction, and also for the opportunity to be part of this wonderful webinar series that you guys have put together. I think it's a great opportunity to speak to this topic, to the guidelines on the establishment and development of TFCAs in the SADC region. Now this, the development of these guidelines, I was commissioned to do. It's rather through a bit of a convoluted process, but obviously the SADC office was strongly involved. Peace Parks Foundation were involved in terms of providing financial resources, and things were facilitated through the CASA Secretariat. And that was in 2014. And at the same time that this process was going on, and at the global level, the IUCN Specialist Group for Transboundary Conservation was busy with the process of updating the guidelines that had been produced in 2001 by Trevor Sandworth, and subsequently brought out these guidelines, the Transboundary Conservation Guidelines, a systematic and integrated approach, in 2015. So it was really quite useful to have these two processes going in tandem, because the regional guidelines could draw on the global experience. So that was very convenient and very useful. The guidelines are just, it's quite a voluminous document. It's just under 200 pages worth. And in 2017, I was approached by GIZ, the office that Lisa works out of, to produce a summary of the guidelines to try and make it a lot more user-friendly. And so we managed to beat the 200 down to just less than 30. So in 2017, a summary guidelines was produced. So if you are intimidated by 200 pages, then you can tackle the 30 pages of the summary. The process of compiling these guidelines was highly consultative and very much a team approach, working with the SADC TFCA network. And there were a series of presentations and workshops that were held. First of all, to get the process going, a workshop, part of a TFCA network meeting that was held in Johannesburg, where a draft table of contents was presented to the members of the network for discussion. So it was panel beated and agreed on at that meeting. Participants were invited to contribute wherever they felt their strengths lay. The process was completely open for people to contribute and to add meat to the bones of the skeleton that was presented. And then a reference group was also established to guide the process. A dedicated workshop was then held in Luanda, Angola, where much of the content was worked on, not in final detail, but a lot more guidance was provided from the members of the network to say what they felt was appropriate to be included in each of the components of the contents, which then left me the work to do in terms of compiling and pulling that together, and of course also coordinating the inputs from the network members. And then finally, at another network meeting in Maseru, Lesotho, the final draft was presented for validation. And then also time was spent on identifying specific SADC case studies that could be used to profile particular aspects of the guidelines. Very briefly, this is just for illustrative purposes to show how many people were involved. These are a few of the folk that provided specific inputs into the compilation of the guidelines, and you can see the names highlighted there. These acknowledgements are on the guidelines so that you can see them there for later reference. But in addition to all of the folk that are listed here, of course, one has to recognize the SADC TFCA network, the SADC office in Gaborone as well, and Peace Parks Foundation are mentioned there as well. So lots of people contributing to this product. The overarching principles that were applied and that guided the compilation of the guidelines and to which the guidelines are aspiring to, there's two of them. First of all, building on the theme from the 2003 World Parks Congress that was held in Durban, whose theme was benefits beyond boundaries. We felt that it was most appropriate to bring that forward. And within that, we felt that the benefits had needed to be absolutely tangible. And in that way, it would work towards ensuring the socioeconomic relevance of any TFCA initiatives within the region. And then secondly, that the pillars of sustainability would be key to driving the thought processes behind the initiation and the establishment of TFCAs. And those pillars, I'm sure most of you are very familiar with. Effective governance being absolutely essential. The need for biodiversity features to persist and for ecosystems to be functional. The need for social relevance, and economic viability or financial viability. And the relationship between those pillars you can see illustrated in that figure, where the economy is nested within the socio-political environment, which is nested within the natural environment, here termed ecosystem services, for want of a better word, and all of that balanced on a foundation of sound governance. So assuming that the governance models that are put in place will ensure that the relationship between those three components is maintained. The structure of the guidelines then very basically is, after an introduction, there are three parts. The first part providing background and contextual information. The second part speaking to the process of initiation. And the third part speaking then to the more complex process of establishment and development of the TFCAs. And these are then backed up by a series of annexures. First of all, details around the compilation process, listing the folk that have been involved in all of those workshops that I've alluded to. The potential benefits of TFCA initiatives, together with examples of ecosystem goods and services, is intended to provide TFCA proponents with tools to motivate for, to help identify what the potential benefits would be that would come out of a TFCA initiative, help them package those initiatives to be able to sell them on to the relevant stakeholders and role players. Background information on existing SADC TFCAs. The diagnostic tool for transboundary conservation planners, I'll speak to a little bit more in a moment. And then the performance appraisal tool that was put together by the Peace Parks Foundation has also been included from an M&E perspective. Then in more detail then, as far as the content is concerned, the introduction covers aspects such as a brief historical perspective, much of what Seth spoke to in the first webinar, provides some indication of what the aims are for these guidelines, essentially to guide TFCA proponents from the initiation stage right through to establishment and development. The guiding principles I've alluded to already. The intended audience of these guidelines, just touching on the fact that this is very widespread, from politicians to affected communities. Once again, touching on the process that was followed in order to compile the guidelines, which relates to the annex that I've just referred to, and then some comments on the structure of the guidelines. Part one then, the background and contextual information that has been provided, some definitions, and it's quite important because it provides the definitions that were agreed to at the global level and those which are included in the IUCN guidelines. The initial definitions that SADC put together in their protocols, and then the definitions that were agreed to through the process of compiling these guidelines. The legal and policy framework, which is critical, and again, the values of the trans-frontier conservation for SADC member states as a supporting section to support proponents to help them promote the idea. And then the status quo of trans-frontier conservation areas in the SADC region, which is supported by the relevant annex. So that deals with the background and contextual information. Part two then speaks to the initiation process. So once the idea is born, is birthed, that a TFCA is potentially doable, there's information on how one goes about identifying the stakeholders and role players that are relevant to the process. Very importantly, assessing the enabling environment. And very often, and I speak on behalf of many of us involved in the conservation fraternity, we tend to have blinkered visions. We see the ecological value of cooperating across international boundaries. where international boundaries have dissected ecosystems, and our visions are clouded by threatened ecosystems, threatened species, etc., etc. And we tend to, or we fail to see the cultural, the social, the political aspects that are so important. And those are really the aspects that create the enabling environment. So this section then speaks to that, to almost caution proponents to say, tread carefully, look very carefully to see whether or not the environment within which you're going into, whether it is enabling or not. And then to follow that with a far more detailed feasibility assessment. And this is where I want to talk to the diagnostic tool for transboundary conservation planners, which was originally developed in 2012 and has very recently been updated. I had the privilege of reviewing the updated version, and the link to access this diagnostic tool is available, as you can see there. And it really is a very strategic way of looking at a whole bunch of aspects that one can run as an individual or even in a workshop mode with relevant stakeholders and role players to get a better understanding of where you are at with your potential TFCA. Whether or not you have significant barriers that might not be, you might not be able to overcome, or alternatively, barriers that require particular strategies to deal with. And then hopefully a green light that tells you the feasibility of this TFCA is really high and that you can proceed with confidence. And then the last component of that initiation process is to design that implementation process. So to think very carefully based on the information coming from pre-feasibility and feasibility, design the implementation process very carefully and objectively. Try and take those ecological and conservation blinkers off and look at it from a far broader perspective. And then lastly, and perhaps the guts of the guideline is for the establishment and the development process, talks about securing buy-in and building legitimacy. And this is where proponents will engage with stakeholders at all levels to sell the idea of the TFCA to them. Following up with then a selection of an appropriate governance model. And what we're referring to here is the structures and the mechanisms that would be most appropriate to the particular dynamics within individual TFCAs. So we're not imposing a specific governance model, but suggesting that proponents need to be very sensitive to the dynamics within their particular TFCA and select the appropriate governance structures and mechanisms that will work most effectively for their particular circumstances. Now, obviously, the geographic extent of the TFCA has been identified probably right in the beginning. People have an idea of what the geographic extent should be. But we're suggesting that at this point here, once quite a substantial amount of engagement has taken place, you would be able to then define the geographic extent a lot more clearly and a lot more confidently. And just using the Great Limpopo TFCA as an example, when it first started out, it was designed as a trans-frontier conservation area, but with, I guess, wisdom coming from the political leadership at that time, the recommendation was to go for a trans-frontier park first, to allow that to establish, and then, as through a process of evolution, allow it to expand. So I think we need to understand that these processes are dynamic, they're iterative, and one can come and revisit each of these steps as the process gains strength and evolves, and as other dynamics enter into the process to influence them. Then developing a framework for joint management. And really this is the framework that will help the development of a joint management plan, if you want. And this is the process of working with the stakeholders to identify where it is you want to be in the long term. First of all, what is that term? Is it 10, 15, 20 years? Depending on the volatility of the dynamics influencing your particular initiative. But very clearly stating and agreeing on what that vision is. What is that desired state, if you want? And then taking cognizance of where you are at the moment, what is the status quo, and what needs to be done in order to get from the status quo to achieve that desired state. And developing then maybe a series of broad management statements. You can call them what you like, aims or goals or management objectives. But they, together with that long-term vision, would then serve as providing the framework for joint management, which can then be followed up by refining, taking each of those broad management statements and breaking them further down towards much more doable statements, short-term statements that can then eventually populate annual work plans, for example. Then second to last is planning for financial sustainability. So once you've developed your framework and your joint management, and you've refined your joint management framework into joint management plan, you're able to budget that, and you'll be able to understand exactly how much it's going to cost to establish and develop and manage this transboundary or transfrontier conservation area. You will then be able to more meaningfully tackle the aspect of financial sustainability, understanding what the budget deficits are, what the contributing partners are able to provide, what partnerships would be able to contribute to the initiative, etc. And if there are funding gaps, then how those funding gaps can be filled. And then lastly, and I'm not going to dwell on this because Clara will speak to this in more detail, is the monitoring and evaluation, which is a critically important aspect and which really closes the circle of this iterative process, helps us to understand the effectiveness of our management plans and what we have learnt by doing and how things need to be adapted as we take the process forward. Then in terms of some perspectives from, or perceptions from my own perspective with regards to SADC TFCAs and the guidelines, that SADC TFCAs have been brought about through a regional approach, which is great. I think it provides for a strategic approach to the establishment of TFCAs. But to a large extent, it also has been opportunistic, which in itself is not a problem. It's great that we can work at picking the low-hanging fruits. But if one had to approach the planning for SADC TFCAs from a systematic conservation planning process, one might find that additional areas are identified which are not necessarily low-hanging fruits. And so what I'm suggesting here is that, perhaps at a point we need to step back from where we're at and just look critically at how effectively the TFCA network is going to achieve biodiversity targets, ecosystem conservation targets in the region. It's largely been driven at a political level, top down, and this was alluded to in the roundtable on Thursday, and I think Dr. Soto spoke to this, saying that inevitably TFCAs are political processes, and inevitably a top-down approach is the sort of default. But we need to be cautious and also actively work to get both top-down and bottom-up dynamics going in the process. Very, very donor dependent, and a huge caution. I don't think that needs too much discussion. We understand that donors have limited lifespans, or donor funding has limited lifespans, and one ends up with a vacuum at the end of that, unless there is really solid planning for financial sustainability. there are few objective feasibility assessments that have been done in supporting the initiation and establishment of SADC TFCAs. There are some, but most of them don't have feasibility assessments, which mean that we lack that ability of looking objectively at them and identifying upfront what the potential barriers are, what the strategies need to be to deal with those barriers and the risks, etc. There's been a limited demonstration of tangible benefits. The sense that I get is that the guidelines they'd mostly now need to be applied retrospectively. They were compiled long after SADC TFCAs actually got going, although there are instances where there are TFCAs in the conceptual state where they could be applied at the initiation phase. And then lastly, that there's been limited uptake and application of the guidelines, despite the fact that the guidelines were compiled in a collaborative way. And I think that's also why I was approached to produce the summary of the guidelines to try and make it a lot more user-friendly. Now, I might have been a little bit provocative with some of the statements that I've made there. Hopefully not too provocative, but if it helps to generate some useful discussion, then I'd be happy for that. And then lastly, just to wrap up quickly, some recommendations from my side is that I think international coordinators could facilitate a process of mainstreaming these guidelines into their planning and management if they haven't done so already. They could apply the guidelines as a checklist to assess their initiation, establishment, and management effectiveness, irrespective of where their particular TFCA is at now in terms of its life history. And then lastly, provide critical feedback for the possible revision and updating of the guidelines by, say, 2025. Lisa, that's me done. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That was really great to just get the total insight of the guidelines on the establishment of TFCAs. Iterations TFCAs in the starting phase have to make, also if we're looking at their governance structures and funding structures. I do have some questions, but I think just as a matter of time, I will park them for now. Do already put them in the chat if you have any questions also for Kevin, so that I can make note of them specifically. What I would like to maybe, after we've had all the 3 presentations, Kevin, if you could also think of like what we've talked about, is a TFCA bottom up or is it top down? What governance structures can help with maybe making sure that a TFCA is more bottom up than top down? Let me just check on the chat. No questions so far. Sorry, I also didn't mention earlier, but the presentation 2, I would just like to take an opportunity to just very briefly go to some question and answers, and then we'll have enough time also for the last presentation. Then maybe very briefly starting with your presentation, Clara. Michael Rampedi, you had a question in the chat, and I'm not sure if you would like to ask it separately. In that case, please just unmute yourself. In other case, I will just read out your question. I will read out the question. So Michael Rampedi asked, I would like to ask about the enabling environment you mentioned. Should all the legal statuses, natural tourism and environment, wildlife, biodiversity conservation policies be harmonized and ratified through a joint management plan before a TFCA can be established? Or do you take a retrospective approach in formulating joint management plans in already existing TFCAs? Or is that more towards Kevin?
I think that's more for Kevin, because my response will be based on the M&E framework, and that will be informed by the agreement and the implementation.
In that case, Kevin, would you be so kind to respond to that question?
Thanks very much, Lisa, for that question. Yes, I think that irrespective of at what stage a TFCA is in terms of its initiation and establishment, it is absolutely essential that it does develop a joint management planning framework and a detailed joint management plan. It's absolutely critical that the partners involved in the TFCA need to know what roles they're playing and where it is within the initiative that the aspects that are associated to collaboration. There's so much that takes place, management that takes place, that is still at a national level. But what is it that is bringing these countries together in a conservation effort? Identifying those very, very clearly, understanding what actions are required, who's responsible, exactly what needs to be done, what are the timeframes, etc. So irrespective of where you are in the process, make sure that you develop a joint management plan, and at the same time, make sure that your joint management plans are regularly revised, reviewed, and updated. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Kevin. Then we had one question from Holly, who actually is just leaving, but she said she will look later later for the answer or discuss with you also separately. But the question was, as the Convention of Migratory Species is one of the only international agreements that is actually based on transfrontier conservation areas with that concept, they are used in a rather broad definition of migratory when it comes to the species they focus on. Is there a reason that other countries have not engaged with this convention very broadly? And this question was for you, Clara.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Ali. No, we actually reviewed the CMS as part of the legal appraisals. It's one of the conventions that is actually hard international law. So together with the CBD, we looked at the CMS, and we also looked at UNESCO Marine Biosphere and the World Heritage Sites, because they also have a transfrontier component. I think the CMS, what Holly meant was that it's one of the first ones that have a transboundary element, but the CBD has an element of transfrontier conservation, and Ramsar certainly has as well. So we looked at all of those, and we've taken the learnings from there. We looked then into more the specific, those that actually had a relevant monitoring evaluation tool that was applicable to their sites. But because of the very nature of the CMS, they don't have implementation sites. And so it was very difficult for us to sort of link the two directly within the framework itself. So we learned the broader legal lessons, but besides that, we looked at other conventions that actually had an implemented M&E framework for critical lessons learned and indicators, inspiration.
Yeah. And during week 9 of our webinar sessions, we will also have a specific session where the Convention of Migratory Species will have a presentation as well, where people can tune into. There was one other question from Paul Buescher, also to you, Clara. Is there a way to peer review these analyses on the SADC TFC as the TFCA M&E reports?
But I don't know what you mean peer review, Paul. We have finalized the M&E framework, so we can share the situation analysis report, which was basically where we drafted the legal appraisal and the lessons learned from the other mentioned M&E tools and frameworks. But I think you would have had that. But in any case, we can share that. That's a public knowledge. And the M&E framework, which we're busy piloting now, that is finalized as well. It's been validated by the Wildlife Technical Committee and by the ministers as well. So I don't think that there is a way in which any peer review process at this stage would be done. In 5 years' time, once we finish the first cycle, definitely there will be a review, but that's a different process altogether.
Okay. Thank you so much, Clara. One of the other questions that I noted was also from Paul, so maybe I can just give him the word. He also had a question for Kevin, where most of the TFCA have moved away from using TFCA coordinators, using the partner states, and adopted TFCAs as a variable approach to conservation and landscape scale. And the CASA TFCA has established a secretariat to guide the process. What is the current status within TFCA regarding coordination? Paul, would you like to maybe add on that?
No, Lisa, I think it's quite clear. Just looking at, as the countries as the countries have adopted TFCAs as a viable tool, they're also setting up the structures to actually guide them to lead the process, like the CASA Secretariat. It did answer in the actual chat lines, so we have picked that up.
Okay. Then we had one more comment from Kuda, so I think I won't go into that too much. Where the comment was possible consider with regard to uptake of the guidelines to for future engagements through the PCs, project commissions, I'm not 100% sure, through the TFC Network Steering Committee and decide on mechanisms for cascading the guidelines down. So I think that's something that that we can also just engage more on, that we make sure that there's uptake on the guidelines. Harry, you have some questions on the chat right now. I think that's the last question that I will allow, but would you maybe want to just put on your mic and camera so that we can see you and you can ask the questions directly? Harry?
So are you addressing me? Harry speaking?
Yeah. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes. Sorry, I have a bit of a problem with my bandwidth. So my camera is a bit a risk that I may lose the connection. So I'm an independent consultant, and I have done quite some transboundary work in the past. And under the Biodiversity Support Program, what was a consortium of WWF US, the Nature Conservancy and World Resources Institute, we ran quite some analysis in between 2000 and 2002 on transboundary approaches. And it was about when SADC TFCA was starting. And we looked at quite a number of approaches across particularly Africa. And in that context, I have two specific questions, and it is related to your question, Lisa, to Kevin, about regarding the top-down and the bottom-up approach. And Kevin, if I understood you correctly in your presentation, you said lots of work was done, and then if I looked at your slides regarding part number 3, you said only then we will look into securing buy-in and building legitimacy. So I was wondering about why is it only done at that point in time? So there's a complete approach set up, there's a whole idea what to do, and only then to get buy-in. And can you elaborate a bit on that? And my question to Clara is, when you talk about harmonization of policies, it's very often very complex, it's very time consuming. And let's say if you would do this within the SADC context, there are certain countries that may be part of the Central African community of Eastern Africa. At the long term, it would mean that you're actually harmonizing policy across the whole of Sub-Saharan or even the whole of Africa. So has there been any consideration to look into policies that just are not contradictory? So they're not harmonized, but they are not contradictory, but can work together. Secondly, are there maybe policies that are just compatible and very supportive, but still not completely harmonized? And then finally, are there then policies that really require harmonization, but that you split it out and avoid losing a vast amount of time on harmonizing everything? Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thanks, Harry. Maybe Kevin, you first, and then Clara.
Thanks very much, Lisa and Harry. Thanks for that question. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, Harry. And in the section on in the second part on the initiation process, in the section that speaks to pre-feasibility, and also the section that speaks to feasibility assessment, and particularly using the diagnostic tool for transboundary conservation planners, there's a significant amount of emphasis on the engagement of relevant stakeholders and role players in that process. So whereas the presentation gave the impression that that only comes into effect in the third part of the guidelines, it's very much spoken to way before that. I trust that answers your question, Harry.
Yes, it does. Thanks, Kevin. And I'm sorry, it's always a challenge in a brief presentation and not knowing all the detail, but because you specifically mentioned in your third part, only then to get buy-in or secure buy-in and have legitimacy. I was really wondering, but thanks, that's well addressed. Thank you.
Sorry, Lisa, if I might just very briefly, It's actually a very strong recommendation that when you run the diagnostic tool for transboundary conservation planners, that it's incredibly useful to run that process with as many of your stakeholders as possible, because you use it then as a basis upon which to investigate all of the dynamics that are appropriate to your establishment process. It helps to begin to build relationships between those stakeholders and also understand diverse opinions and diverse understandings. So it's a very, very useful tool in that pre-feasibility and feasibility phase. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Kevin. I think also in the week, I think in the last week, we also discussed UNESCO biosphere reserves, who have more a bottom-up approach in the broad sense when people talk about it. But definitely, I think as much stakeholders should be included. Clara, just very brief before we go on to the next presentation.
Yeah, sure. So Harry, just very briefly, policy harmonization was not something that I had to do for that exercise. So I just looked at different legislation that was applicable to TFCA and tried to learn from there. But very briefly, there is a legal register, which is the beginning of a policy harmonization exercise that I did with some colleagues years ago for the Limpopo TFCAs that look at all biodiversity conservation legislation internationally, African Union and SADC. And being a legal register, it identifies exactly what you say. What is not contradictory, what is the gap in between what happens at the international level and what happens at the local level, and give suggestions for harmonization. So there is a document applicable for the GLTFCA, so therefore for the 3 countries of the GLTFCA, or at least for all the countries that are signatories in Southern Africa to all those international treaties, and that's a start. But what you asked for was not particularly part of my work in the M&E framework, sorry. But I can share the document with you if you want.
Okay, thanks for putting you on the spot with that. But yeah, as I said, because it is so time consuming, I think it's helpful just to look into that, split it out and don't spend time on things you don't need to spend time on. Thanks very much again.
Thank you. Actually the floor is for our next presenter. We have a presentation from Knowledge to Action for a Protected Planet, the Biopalma Regional Resource Hub. And the SADC TFCA portal. So the Biopalma program is implemented actually with 3 organizations, the IUCN, the Regional Center for Management of Resources for Development, as well as the EU Joint Resource Commission. As a first speaker, we have Beryl, who works for IUCN at the regional technical officer for the Biopalma program in Eastern and Southern Africa. And she's responsible for the Regional Resource Hub in collaboration with the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources and for Development. Beryl, you have the floor. Beryl, you want to unmute yourself?
Sorry about that. I was continuing to ramble. Yeah, sorry. So thanks, Lisa. Thank you, everyone, for joining this session. So I'm quickly going to just go over the Biopalma program. We are going to focus on the Regional Resource Hub for the Eastern and Southern Africa region. So I'm just going to set the scene, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleague from one of the implementing organizations to just go through a demo of the Regional Resource Hub web portal. So the Biodiversity and Protected Areas program is a 6-year program running from 2017 to 2023. It's an initiative of the Organization of the African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, financed by the European Union's 11th Development Fund, and as Lisa has mentioned, implemented by IUCN, the Joint Research Center, and the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development. So the main goal of the program is to improve governance and management, and also the data updating of protected and conserved areas in the region. And we do this in 3 ways. Through the action component, capacity building, and the main one, which is the Regional Resource Hub. In this presentation, you're going to focus on the Regional Resource Hub, where the overall objective is to support data collection, analysis, monitoring and reporting, and of course also working with the organizations and staff to manage and use this information. So moving on to the regional resource hub, the main function is to have a platform that can facilitate exchange of data and information among decision makers and managers of protected and conserved areas, and also to support the regional priorities for decision support products like development of a state of protected and conserved areas report, which will be done. We are already in the process of developing one, and we'll do one other before the end of the program. The services that the Regional Resource Hub offers include customized products, which we develop in liaison with the RECs and the national agencies, so to just meet their unique needs in the areas that they are working on, and then also to transform data into actionable information that can be used for decision making. So not just having data, but making sure that this data is able to inform decision makers. And then just to create the link between the RRH, the Regional Resource Hub, and the SADC TFCA portal, is that the SADC TFCA portal was recently migrated to the Regional Resource Hub for hosting, and this happened in February 2022, in 2020. And the rationale for this was because the SADC TFCA portal focus mirrors what we are trying to do at the Regional Resource Hub, which is working across borders between agencies, making decisions across landscapes, and also sharing of data and information. And then, of course, not forget duplicating, to avoid duplication of what is already existing, but complementing what is already there. So in terms of complementarity between the Regional Resource Hub and the SADC TFCA portal, we'll be focusing on linking the data to targets so that we can be able to monitor those. So international targets at a regional level, at a national level, and at global levels, and also using this data to measure and drive progress in a positive way through promoting those assessment tools on management and governance, and also by focusing on putting the right information and the right questions into the system. And one of the ways that we have identified and we are doing now is we have formed a group of people in the Eastern and Southern Africa region from different agencies and different organizations. So these are experts who have volunteered to be a group that will be giving feedback and providing advice on the development and improvement of the Regional Resource Hub, so that it is able to cater and also cater to the needs and the priorities of the countries and the regional organizations. So that is my brief and quick overview of the BioPAM and the Regional Resource Hub. So I will hand over now to my colleague Ngugi from the Regional Center of Mapping of Resources for Development. And then if you need more information, you can just follow those links. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Beryl. Yeah, go ahead, Ngugi.
Thank you very much, Beryl, for that presentation, and thank you participants for attending this webinar. I'm here to basically do a small demonstration of the SADC TFCA portal, as well as the Regional Resource Hub. So the SADC TFCA portal is, of course, managing information for the transfrontier conservation areas. So in the portal, you will be able to find information about some of the transfrontier conservation areas that are covered. You can be able to subscribe to the newsletter that is usually shared to the participants who have registered in the portal. You can be able to access the latest news that the region is doing, as well as follow them on Twitter, on the social media platform. It's also possible that you can go to check the publications that have been done in the TFCA specifically for the SADC region. There are also some stories that have been put up in the TFCA portal that you can be able to access, and also a list of the upcoming events that are lined up. like for example, the webinars that have been ongoing in the various weeks. So that is basically the TFCA portal. So I will shift gears a little bit to the regional resource hub, which my colleague was talking about. So the regional resource hub is mostly like a knowledge hub, and the purpose of it is to support the decision making, specifically for the protected and conserved areas. It has a couple of things inside. Among them, there are tools and products that I'll be demonstrating momentarily. There's also an initiative that the Regional Resource Hub is trying to bring on board. It's called the Blue Planet Hub. It leverages on the blue economy concept that seeks to unlock the potential of the oceans and to see which opportunities can be tapped. So here we shall be having a lot of marine and coastal information being showcased in the Regional Resource Hub. If we go down to the Regional Resource Hub, we have created an analytics dashboard to show the protected areas that we have in the region. It's possible that you pick a specific country, and you will be able to see the designation that is in that particular protected area, whether that protected area is a forest reserve or a natural reserve, what is the governance type of that particular protected area, how many they are, both at the national level and the international level. What you're seeing on the screen is mostly at the regional level. I can zoom into a specific country. Like in this case, we have Malawi. So you can be able to see that in Malawi, most of the governance types for the protected areas are not reported. We can tell that there are 54 protected areas. 3 of them are international. And you can be able to see from this common designation where they are coming from. You can also tell how many are under the terrestrial, how many protected areas are covering the terrestrial, and how many are covering the marine. Of course, Malawi being a landlocked country, they don't have anything in the marine. That's why most of them are in the terrestrial. If I pick another example of a country which has another country which has a coast, like for example Namibia, we can tell the area that is covered by the protected areas as far as marine is concerned. So this can be done in each of the countries that we are covering, and you can be able to achieve that. So the Regional Resource Hub also has a section where you can get latest news as well as upcoming events. So one of the things that we are also doing is to cross-post the webinars that are being done in the SADC region, and we are featuring them here. Something else that the Regional Resource Hub is doing is to try to link the targets of different policies to the data sets that are out there. So like, for example, here we have a country like Tanzania. You can be able to track what are some of the indicators, some of the protected areas that are in that particular country. You can be able to get this information and download it in CSV or Excel format. You can be able to check what indicators that are on the ground that are affecting productivity. In this case, for example, soil productivity and so on. You can also check things like marine information, forest area, comparing it with the total area of that particular country. You can be able to see also some of the activities that are putting pressure on the land. Activities like, for example, agricultural activities, change in population, deforestation activities that are happening. And I must say that this data is being pulled from the FAO website, and it's being collated so that it's easy for it to be used in showcasing information to the decision makers. Something else that this particular tool allows you to do is to see what response activities are being done on the ground, and linking these response activities not just at the global level, but at the regional level. You can be able to see what pressures what pressure or what activities are happening that that can be tracked, so that they can assist and inform policy makers. Like, for example, in this particular case, we can look at the response activities that are being done at the regional level, In this particular case, I've picked one on reducing illegal killing of elephants and illegal trade in elephant products. You can be able to link this particular data set. Like specifically, this data set is coming from the monitoring of illegal killing of elephants program. That's Mike data. And you can be able to see where these particular sites have been distributed. And when this information is being reported, this information is included for people to see what is happening on the ground. There is also a place where you can link information at the national level. Like for example, national policies specifically for this one is on national biodiversity strategies and action plan. You can link it and add targets to it. And it helps the country or the people who are managing the protected areas have a better idea of what is happening on the ground and to see if the intended objective has been met. So basically that's a round of my presentation. I'll hand over to Steve to do a summary of the two presentations. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ngugi. A lot to cover there, a lot of detail, but I just wanted to underline a few messages. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm a geographic outlier today. I'm speaking to you from Italy, so I'm out of the region, and I miss it. It's been a long time since I've been back there. But I'm looking forward to the opportunity that we have to support the work that's going on by bringing this TFCA portal that we've seen and we've been working with for some time into this regional resource hub. It's really a natural home for it. And I'm glad that the BioPalmer program that I represent can support that, because we're very much in the business of understanding what makes protected areas work or not. And we are looking at evidence for effectiveness. So all of this data that we see, that it's not just there as a kind of catalogue, but it's there to support decision-making. And we share that same regional opportunity, that regional perspective, and regional challenges. So we want to use the work in the Resource Hub and the support to the TFC portal to encourage data sharing, to encourage data use across borders. And the very important thing that Ngugi demonstrated there is linking it to conservation and socioeconomic targets and objectives. And that's really the thing that sets this all apart. It's not just data for data's sake. We're really starting from what are we trying to achieve? How do we monitor that? And therefore, what do we need to measure? So for me, the message that I'd just like to pass is that we have a great opportunity here to carry on that iterative, continuous data collection process that Clara also presented. We need to do it in a structured way and link it to what we're trying to achieve. What are the outcomes that we want, and how do we measure those? So I hope we've managed to get that message across, and we're very much at your disposal to help you with that ongoing process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I think it's a great opportunity. We originally were, of course, also wanting to discuss this in a physical meeting in March, when we all thought that was still possible, so that we could actually workshop a bit through the whole thing, how to link this better. So maybe I think we should try to do that still, not in the scope of this this webinar, but later on. But I think very important linkages as well, especially also looking your experience in East Africa. The SADC TFCA Network Steering Committee had its first exchange between East Africa and SADC. So I think it's quite important also to make sure that we have within the region knowledge exchange and collaboration, but also cross-regional. I see a question coming in from Lisa van Dongen. Lisa, would you just like to pose the question yourself and unmute yourself?
Sorry, yes, it was just silly. I really enjoyed the, I didn't catch the link, so I was just trying to go to the page myself. It's not complicated. I just wanted the web link so I could go and look at the
beyond the first question. Okay, that's fine. And then I also have a second question from Michael Rampedi. How often is it updated? So Guki, I'm not sure if you want to respond to that. How often is the BioPAMA, the Regional Resource Hub, updated?
Yeah, thank you, Michael, for that question. We have just actually started up the Regional Resource Hub. We have not even gone, we have not officially launched it. We will be launching it sometimes in August officially. So when you visit it, you might find some information slightly not really in the right place, but we felt that it's a good idea to share this particular platform. And the idea is to be updating it at least every quarter. There will be a specific section for the countries which will be managed by the teams that my colleague talked about. So I would imagine at least every quarter of a year the information should be updated regularly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ngubi.
Clara.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just because of Michael's question was also on the portal, and we can explain that further to you, Michael, but as a representative of a member state, you can also upload your own content on the TFCAs that you're working with or for, on what your country is doing for TFCAs directly on the SADC TFCA portal. It's a separate process, and we're happy to explain it to you later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we can put it in the chat as well. I mean, it's quite easy. If you go to the TFCA webinars, you have a section where you can also register, and once you're registered, you can also post your own messages and information on the members only environment. Then Tiana is asking, who is in charge of providing and validating data? Each country, or how is it, how's the responsibility? I'm not sure who of the panel would like to answer that question.
Yeah, I can answer the question. So the data comes from the national focal points that have been appointed by their respective countries in charge of protected areas. These are mostly under the Ministry of Environment. So they have already, we are working with another partner called United Nations World Conservation Monitoring Center. So these they have a mandate of collecting and collecting information from all these countries. So like the dashboard that I demonstrated, it is pulling data from their database, and it is now putting it now in the context of the Eastern and Southern African region that we are covering. So the information comes from the national focal points, then it is validated by the WCMC together with the focal points themselves, and then after that it is published. If it is okay, then it's now uploaded and shared online for people to access it.
Okay, thanks very much, Ngugi. I'm not sure if there are any more remaining questions on the portal. I see that Beryl is posting the link as the URL as well. Thank you very much. If not, then of course I encourage everyone to also follow the link and go to the Resource Hub and the portal. I think we'll probably also have a news announcement going out on the Resource Hub when it gets launched, so that also people can visit it and find more information. As I said, I think it would be good to workshop as well a bit more into detail with the smaller group to see how the linkages can be made between the portal and the Resource Hub. I was just also reminded that I had one final question for Kevin that I not got back to last time, which was on basically the top-down, bottom-up discussion we had around TFCAs, and where I asked Kevin to have a think about what governance structures or what aspects anyone that is involved in establishing TFCAs should think of when they envision to have a more bottom-up approach. Kevin, would you like to respond to that?
Thanks very much, Lisa. Yes, I can't say exactly what governance structures would be appropriate, because once again, I want to emphasize the fact that the governance mechanisms and structures that are identified need to be appropriate to the particular circumstances. The I think the point that I want to try and get across here is that our default is to manage these processes top down, because we are so dependent on people in decision-making positions, political levels, giving the mandate for transboundary collaboration, the people who hold the purse strings, who release the resources that are needed, etc. And so our default is to sort of lean towards that level. However, we need to bear in mind that people on the ground, the bottom-up approach, those folk on the ground are going to be there for a lot longer than the decision makers. Decision makers have short tenures, but people on the ground, they live there. These are the affected communities. These are the beneficiaries. And we really need to put a lot of effort into making sure that we engage with these people, that we put them into structures that can facilitate co-management, collaborative management of the components of the TFCAs. In our situational analyses that we do, we need to do those very thoroughly, very objectively, in order to be able to identify all the appropriate stakeholders that need to be engaged. The process of doing an ecosystem service review would help you understand the extent to which your target area is benefiting affected communities, the pathways of those benefits and the way they are flowing, who those beneficiaries are. And that would help you to better understand the extent to which that bottom up or the affected stakeholders on the ground need to be engaged, the basis upon which they need to be engaged. Lisa, I'm not sure if that provides the sort of insight that you were looking for.
No, I think it does, and I think we can also maybe it will come back, I think, throughout the sessions a lot. And like I said earlier, we also have in the last week, week 10, we will also discuss the other designations that might have a different approach, and we can, I think, learn from each other. What I think both is needed. You need the stakeholder engagement and the bottom-up approach, but you will also need the governance to actually give it a home, especially because it has a clear boundary. So I think we'll definitely get to that. And I encourage everyone to also, go to the guidelines, as well as on the portal you'll find a news update on the new diagnostic tool that was just launched as well, right? So people can have a look at that. But as we're approaching now our time, or we're on the time, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all presenters on the various aspects of governance structures, of M&E systems, and also really the IT systems behind it. We hope to see you at many more sessions. On Thursday, we have our next session looking at how to fund new and established TFCAs with 3 speakers. Werner Meiber from Peace Parks Foundation, Patience Gandiva from Zimparks, and Jörg van Jambe from Casa TFCA. So we hope to all see you there. Also look at the TFCA portal for all the recordings and presentations. We will also send an email at the end of the week with everything for your pursuit. But to just say goodbye to and to have an idea who we all have on this call, I would like to ask you to maybe, if your bandwidth allows it, to put the camera on so that we can wave at each other. And I hope to see you again at the next session. Okay, goodbye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Lisa. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Hi, Christine.
That's what I was just about to say, but she's gone. She's gone.
Hello. Bye.
Hello. Goodbye.
Bye. See you on Thursday. Don't forget the Thursday sessions.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much for attending. Bye-bye.
Bye, Evelyn. Bye, Stephen.
Okay.
The turnout is excellent, guys. Huh? It's quite active.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I cannot turn off my video, but I managed to post a picture there.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tawanda.
Great, great,
Okay.
Clara. That's good presentation. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's great to see so many
You wanna?
people. Yes.
Yeah,
we're
no,
gonna
it's
close the
great.
meeting now. And thank you very much. And see you all on Thursday. Thank you, everybody.
Thursday
See you then.
for everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.